How's it going?
Great, Glenn. How are you?
I am doing great. I'm going to put your logo up there, but
Okay, awesome.
I,
Thank you.
I say it's a blast from the past because way back, God, it's 11 years now. But
Wow.
11 years ago, I
Yes.
did a startup office, and you were the one who actually helped me find my space and connect
Yes.
me with all the professionals to negotiate my lease. But at that time, you were just the Evan Reynolds group. It wasn't
Yes, that
dental
was
space
that was the
advice.
clever name for our company, with the Reynolds company. That's how creative I was. So we sort of morphed into doing working with almost dentists exclusively. So I said, I need a name that is more representative of what we're actually doing. So we changed the name to Dental Space Advisors probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So to tell people this is exactly what we do.
Well, the thing is that the service is still really good because I've reached out to you guys throughout the years just for advice, and I
Sure.
wanted to bring you on because there's so many people that are in this group that actually have worked with you before. You helped them kind of
Yes.
realize their dreams of being a practice owner, and I thought, well, who better would know how to just kind of deal with landlords, understand what's
Sure.
going on with all of us, and then also answer these questions. So look, we're going to just dive in right into it. I'm
Okay.
going to put this on the screen. Guys, if you have any questions, type in the comments section. I will feed it to Evan. He's here to help us out. But like I said, he's worked with many of us in here. But before we kind of go into those questions that we're thinking about, can you just really briefly just tell everyone what you have been doing for years now? I mean, obviously
Sure.
you've been
Sure.
doing it for years when you connected with me 11 years ago.
20 years ago. Yeah. So we started in 2001. So we've worked with over 1,000 dental professionals since 2001, primarily all over Texas. We do some work outside of Texas for sure, but it's mostly all over Texas. So we help those that are interested in opening a new location. We do all the demographic analysis, competition studies, find the best area, find the best space, do all the negotiations, kind of manage the project. We also help people strategically negotiate their lease renewal. So really anything related to real estate for a dental professional. And we're always available for just general questions at any time from anyone. So
And I've
happy
done
to.
that before. One of your associates, Trey, I've reached out to him a bunch of times,
Yeah,
just kind of picking his brain and whatnot. And so,
sure.
in spirit of you just kind of providing all this information, I wanted to bring you on. So, let's just dive right into it, guys.
Okay.
Again, if you have any questions, type in the comments section. I'll put it back in the crawler back on again. And everyone, the thing that's on everyone's mind is this: okay, things are shut down. We're not seeing as many patients. We're trying to cut
Sure.
costs. We're trying to do everything we can to just stay afloat. And the question that people always come up is like, okay, how do I reach out to our landlord? We had another guest who provided like a document, which has been helpful, but
Yeah.
it's kind of like, it's a lot more sometimes than just shooting an email and just hoping and praying. So
Yes.
Evan, let's just dive right into it. What is your suggestion? Because you've dealt with both. You've dealt
Oh,
with
I've done.
and you've dealt with the landlords.
We've been consulted with a number of dental professionals in the last 4 weeks, and we found that the most effective approach is a more personalized approach. And so, a form letter or something like that, is great, but it's not as effective. And we've found that when you use a third party, someone like us, to communicate with the landlord, it's not quite as effective. This is a real personal situation, and we found that that's the most effective thing, is to contact the landlord. And the question also is, what am I asking for?
Yeah.
What's reasonable? And I think we're all kind of looking at the timeline for reopening and what that means, and when we do open, who's going to come back and how quickly, and when are we going to get revenue? So, I think the one of the objectives is cash flow management, cash conservation.
Mhm.
So I think if you can, most landlords are willing to help. We've run into a few that are not, but the vast majority are. And so I think it's about asking for rent deferral, deferring rent for, say, April, May, at this point, leaving it open potentially to talk about June, with some sort of payback period down the road. Now, you don't want to get yourself into a tough situation down the road, because we don't necessarily know what that's going to look like. So if you can start paying that back over 12 months, that I believe is a good result. So I think that's the approach, and really it's a personal appeal and telling them that you are shut down. You know, you're not a restaurant that's doing takeout and delivery and all that. You know, you are shut down, mandated by the government to do so. And so we've also had people that there's been a lot of different situations, or at least a lot of results. So we've had rent deferral where we've deferred the rent for say April, May, and then we've added 2 months onto the end of the lease. We've had situations where we've abated the rent in exchange for an extension. I just did this the other day for a doctor. She had 2 years left on her lease, which was kind of a long time, but she knew that she wanted to renew. So we've extended the lease for 5 years, and we're able to abate the rent for 4 months now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we've done that. Plus, she got a tenant improvement allowance and some other things that she needed that she can use now, not have to wait 2 years to do that. So there's the thing that I would look at is if you have maybe a couple of years left on your lease or less, certainly that can factor into the negotiation and discussion with the landlord. Get the abated rent now, something you can work with. If you've got a long-term, that's probably not going to be as relevant. And in those cases, if you can defer the rent, and sometimes they're going to want you to pay maybe your triple nets or expenses, but if you can defer that, give yourself enough time, they're probably going to be pushing in a lot of cases for you to pay that back by the end of the year. I would feel better if I've got like 12 months to do that, just so I don't get into a cash crunch situation again. By having to try to pay back this rent. So it's about cash flow management, cash conservation. That's the key right now. And anything you can do to help that is obviously important. And the landlords are also going through a different situation. A lot of times their lenders will dictate what they can do and what they can't do. So it's not always your landlord that maybe is being difficult. So they've got to defer to the lender, which will allow them to do certain things. They're looking for relief themselves. And so, that might be deferring one or two loan payments on their part. So sometimes that hasn't worked out as quickly. So, you're calling saying, hey, and, they're like, well, this is going to take me several weeks to work this out with my own lender. But ultimately, you've got to do what you got to do. You've got to do everything you can do to conserve cash. And if you have a landlord that's not necessarily flexible, I wouldn't immediately get out the checkbook. They're not. I feel like, it's very unlikely they're going to default anyone at this, but I think it's just conversation, communication, work with them. Of course, they want you to pay the rent right away.
Sure.
That's what without any problems, but that's not the reality of the situation. So if they're not being cooperative, I think it's important to maintain that dialogue. Tell them, hey, we're shut down. Continue to reinforce that message. Hey, I can pay the triple nets this month, et cetera, et cetera. So that's for the ones but I think for the vast majority are trying to be helpful. They understand the situation.
And it sounds like, and you brought up multiple situations where you can work with the landlord, right? And create a win-win, because if you think about it, if you defer, like when that one client you work with, 3-4 months deferred, that right now, especially going on right now, that is so essential. And then she added some more years on the back end, which it actually helps the landlord out. But I think it's a win-win in that situation.
Absolutely. And that's an abatement. That's not a deferral, so that's free rent now as opposed to deferring the rent down the road. So I think if you have a few years left on the lease and you want to stay, it's definitely worth considering that option and seeing if that creating that win-win. And getting abated rent now where you don't have to pay it back at all is crucial. Guys.
And if you for those who are watching, we got a bunch of people on. For those who are watching right now, if you like what you're hearing, type in the comments section, Evan. Put Evan down there. Show us some love. Show us some love that you're listening. Show him some love as well. Yes. And then we have this one quick question. Let me just put this on real quick. And this user's like, well, does Evan work with people in California? Well, Evan, we were talking about you in Texas, but do you work with people out in the States?
We don't typically, but I would encourage people to, if they have any questions, get in touch with me. You can call me, you can email me. I'll answer any questions. We typically, we've in the last few years, we've worked with a lot of orthodontists nationally, and that's come out of a relationship we have with a larger group, but in some pediatric dentists nationally. But again, I emphasize that I'm available for questions, guidance. I'll look at documents. I'll look at whatever, give you an opinion, no cost, no nothing, so I'm happy to help any way that I can. So if you have any questions or anything, feel free to reach out to me.
And I'm going to say this right now, and he's not going to say it himself because he's a pretty modest guy, but I'm going to say I've been really thankful and grateful for the relationship I've had with Evan over the years. And I've seen so many people, especially in this group, have worked with them, and everyone has said great things because here's the thing, they're here. After I signed my lease and did it way back when, I still kind of reach out to them and just throw out questions, just say, hey, I reached out to Trey, one of his associates. I was like, hey, is there any spaces around? Like, I'm still kind of looking around. And he's like, yeah, Dr. Val, send it over. So for those of you who've had the privilege of working with dental space advisors in the past, look, guys, understand that, yes, they took care of you, they took care of your lease and all that good stuff, but they're still here for you. That's what he's saying.
Absolutely. I tell people all the time, I say, we're with you forever. So whatever questions you have, and sometimes I get questions and I never hear about it again. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. It must have gotten resolved or whatever. So we're happy to help. We try to be very long-term.
Yeah. And I think we have somebody here who's worked with you in the past. This doctor saying, my lease is due for renewal soon. Hey,
okay,
reach out.
There you go.
Reach out.
Reach out to me. We'll talk about it and see what the situation. And one of the things also is if you need refurbishment allowance or anything else to address, obviously that's the time to do it when you're looking at a renewal. So we want to factor that into the negotiations as well, along with hopefully some abated rent. But every landlord's going to respond differently. We try to be as strategic as possible, understand what the landlord's motivations are and what's beneficial to them. We obviously want to get the best deal for us. We've got to give something to get something, and we want to be strategic about that.
Well, and let's just kind of stay on the spirit of that last comment. That one doctor was like, hey, my lease is coming up, Evan. We got to reach. Let's talk about if there's a lease renewal that's coming up within the next few months. Let's start with that, and then we'll transition to someone who's watching right now. They're thinking, okay, I wanted to do a startup, and I'm kind of scared. But in any kind of crisis, there's always some kind of opportunity. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the lease renewal, and then for the startup docs, is it still a good time for me to start looking around for a space?
Absolutely. So I think as far as renewals, I would strongly encourage people to start that process wherever you are in the country, whether you're working with us or someone like us. Start that process about a year, 9 months to a year prior to lease expiration, for sure. The more time you have, the more flexibility you have. The key, and I say this to people all the time in any kind of renewal negotiation, is you have to convince the landlord that there's a very realistic chance you're going to move. Otherwise, you have no leverage. That might be convincing them that you're maybe going to construct your own building. Maybe you're going to buy an office condo. There's got to be something else out there. They've got to understand that they have something to lose. If I just go to them and say, hey, I need your best deal. I tell people that's like going to the car dealer saying, hey, I have to buy a car today. Give me your best deal. You have no leverage. So you've got to convince, and that takes time to convince them. I can't call them one day and tell them that, then call them the next day and call them. It's a little bit of theater, but it's got to play out. And whether it's real or not, and maybe you are evaluating alternatives in the market, but you've got to start early, start delivering that message to the landlord. They've got to understand they've got something to lose. You're a captive tenant. They know that. They know you're not going to move across the street and spend another $100 a square foot to build out your space. That's not a good scenario, So that's the key, is starting early, reinforcing the fact that you are evaluating alternatives. And I always try to convince the landlords that maybe the space, if you did leave, is not as leasable as they think. A lot of times they think, oh, well, I'll get somebody else to jump in here. And I think in some, in cases they've seen that recently where that hasn't worked out as well for them. There are some vacant dental spaces here and there that would be considered kind of premium locations that just they haven't been able to find a tenant for it. So it's not that easy to just go out and get somebody else. So the point is, in any situation, you have to convince them that there's a realistic chance you're going to relocate. Otherwise, you have no leverage whatsoever. So start that process early, and that'll help you out. If you contact them with a couple of months left, you've got no leverage. They know there's no chance you're going to leave. So start early.
You said like 9 months to a year. What about in this situation where you kind of need like that help with the rent and whatnot? And let's say it's instead of a year, what if it's like a couple of years left?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's what I mentioned. The other example was we had 2.5 years left on the lease, and so I think that's, again, not every landlord is going to be as cooperative, but it's definitely worth something to consider. If you know that you're going to stay and you've got, I don't care if it's 2-3 years left, you it's worth trying. And if we can get the abatement now, and we're getting a good rent, we don't want to do this just to get a really bad deal, obviously. But if we can get refurbishment allowance dollars that we might need to spruce up the space, we can get that. We get a reasonable rent. Then it's definitely something worth considering. And if we can get that abatement now, which is the key, obviously, if that doesn't work, the whole thing doesn't work. So if we can get favorable abatement now to help with the cash flow, then that's definitely something worth exploring.
Yeah. So let's go to a different point, and that is there was a number before this all happened, and I'll say this: no one saw this coming. No one did. I mean, we knew that there was a chance of a downturn and whatnot. I mean, people have talked about that for years, but I don't think anyone's ever thought that this would happen, and to the extent of how things were going. And so, look, it is what it is, but there was a bunch of people who were thinking about, hey, I need to open a practice. Absolutely. So I'm going to ask you this now. Those same people who are maybe a little bit scared, and they still have that dream, what do you think about in this time, and is there opportunities that they could take advantage of? Because look, the landlords are probably they want people to come in, and they're probably just as scared as well.
No, absolutely. And I think what's going to come out of this for a lot of people that were maybe thinking about it, or down the road, a lot of this is a little bit scary if you do have a practice and you're shut down, you've got employees. But I think thinking through it, this, for people that want more control over their situation, more control over their earning power, more control over their job, I think this is a little bit of a wake-up call, in that you don't really have that if you're working for someone else. So I think this is an opportunity. I think this will accelerate some thinking for people. And I do think the opportunity is there. Of course, I think that opening, we've got some clients that have been building out their space. They signed a lease in November and they're opening, in the next couple of weeks. That's a scary proposition. Yeah. But I do think that it's going to accelerate the thinking. I think there's opportunities out there. This gives you time to think about the situation. I think it gives you time to pause and reflect. I think a lot of times when you're working 40, 50 hours a week, et cetera, all those things, I think this is giving you an opportunity to pause and reflect and think about what you really want to do. It gives people to take a breath. So I think that's going to accelerate that. I think it's a situation of control. It's like, okay, yes, of course, I've got some additional responsibilities with the staff and other things, but I think this is something that, at least I'm in control of this. I'm not being told that, hey, one day you're stopping, you're not working, and we don't know when we're going to need you back. Question is, from an associate standpoint, is it, when we do, is this going to be a slow recovery, and when are people going to get back, and all those sorts of things? At least you have your own practice, you control your situation, you have greater control over your earning power. I think that's a lot of what's going to come out of this. And I think as far as landlords, I think it's a little early to tell. I think we're going to see a lot on the other side, whatever that means, on the June, July, August, what tenants are coming back and what tenants are leaving, and I think there's no question, certainly in the restaurant sector, I think we're going to see a lot of those restaurants not return. All those that maybe were struggling a little bit in the beginning, I think it's hard to believe that they're going to be making their way back. So I think, is this going to be a complete shift to a tenant certainly in Texas, has been a landlord market for many years.
Yeah.
I think it's too early to tell on that. But I do think that the tenant improvement allowance and the concessions, I think, are going to be more significant than they were before. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So I think it's going to be, when we tell people as far as the startup process is concerned, start in earnest 6-8 months prior to when you want to be open. So, hopefully, if you were to start in the next few months, then, you're looking at first quarter of 21, assuming the real estate is complete at that time. Hopefully we're out of the woods at that point. So I think there is a good opportunity here. I think there's an opportunity, and I always really try to encourage people that want to be entrepreneurs. I think dentists by nature are entrepreneurs. I speak to the Baylor fourth years every year, and I kind of ask around, and I'm like, and people say, gee, are there's many startups out there? I'm like, I don't think anyone goes to dental school thinking they want to work for somebody else the rest of their lives. It's an entrepreneurial position just by its nature. It's not that way in med school or anything like that. So I think, people always have that in the back of their mind, and I think it's about controlling your situation, an opportunity to sort of set your own path. And I think that's going to give. I think that's what's going to come out of this. I think a lot of people are going to think about this and go, okay, this is something I can do. It's not going to, I'm not going to be open until first or second quarter of 21. Hopefully, we have to be optimistic. We have to think that things are going to be back to normal. So I think that's what's going to happen. Right now.
Well, and I think that's really good advice because I'm trying to think back of when I did the startup, and it is kind of a long process, right? I mean, and you have time to think about it.
Yeah. And particularly if there's a project, if you're looking at a project that's not built yet, it might not be delivered for another year. And some of the better properties are under construction or to be built. So that's another consideration. So I wouldn't want anyone to think, gee, if I start this process, I'm going to be open in 3 months, and that's a bad time to. That's not really the way it works. So it's going to take some time, depending on if the real estate's existing or to be built. So I'm not. I think I think it's a good time to think about what you want and how you want to proceed. And the timing's got to be right for everyone in terms of what they want to do. But I do think it's a good time to kind of take a breath and think about, kind of look at the next 5-10 years and think about what you want to do.
I love it. And, that's such great advice there. And, we have a question from the audience. I'm going to pull this up. And this is kind of like a general question, but just wondering, is it better to do a contract or lease, a short-term lease, like 5 years, or is it better to do a 10-year lease? I
think it depends on where you are. If this is a renewal, a lot of times it's 5 years, unless there's a significant, compelling motivation by the landlord to do a longer term. We do have some leases that are renewed longer term, particularly if we need a lot of allowance. As far as a new lease, typically we're looking at 10 years because it gives us cost certainty in terms of the rent for that term. Plus, really importantly, it allows us to get as much free rent as possible up front, which is very helpful for the launch, and also as much allowance dollars as we can possibly get. A shorter term is generally almost always going to result in less allowance money, and that's something that we need. We're not a shoe store. We're spending $100 a square foot plus, to build out the space. This is a long-term expensive endeavor. And, some people worried about the term. I tell them that the only exit is the sale of this property, sale of this practice. If it's, that's the only exit. If it's for whatever reason you want to move or it's not working or whatever, you're going to sell this, and you need to have some term left on that for the buyer. So whether it's death, disability, God forbid, it's still going to be a sell. You're not just going to lock the doors ever and walk away. So I feel like certainly for a startup, an initial contract, I think 10 years makes a lot of sense, but you've got to be comfortable with that term. I have had some people that are like, I'm going to build my own building in 5 years, and you've got to make that work financially. You got to pay back loans, you got to pay back the startup loan. But I would say 98% of the time, we're looking at a 10-year lease for the initial contract for all
right.
of
So, yeah, good terms, and that's actually what you had me on as well. And so, hey, you've been doing this. Evan has been doing this for years, right? Over 20 years. Okay, he negotiated back in the day at my startup 11 years ago. He worked with me, and it was a different name, but the service is still the same. And so, for those who are watching right now, if you work with dental space advisors, Evan just said, look, if you have any questions right now, if you have any concerns about this whole situation and your lease and how to talk to landlords, reach out to them. I brought them on here just in case you guys were shy and didn't want to reach out to them. But let's go back.
Yes.
Let's go back
Sure.
to let's get some action steps right there. I'm a really big action step person.
Sure.
And so, okay, now let's go back to the beginning where, okay, we need to talk to the landlord and figure out if they can work with us in some way. So you said start off with the best way to do it is to reach out to them, call them.
Glenn, your audio is cutting out on me.
Oh, sorry about that. You hear me now?
Yeah, I can't hear you. Sorry, I didn't hear your. I'm sure that was a great question, but I can't hear it.
Okay, no. So what I was just gonna say is, let's go back to how do they reach out?
Yeah, I can't hear the.
Still can't
hear the question.
Okay, all right. Here, you know what? My mic is still working. I guess you still can't hear me? Still can't hear me? Okay, let me see.
Yeah. Can you hear me? You can nod your head. You can hear me.
So
okay.
Let me
I wish I could hear your question. I cannot hear any of your audio.
Okay, so how to approach the landlord? Let's discuss again. Okay, guys, hang tight here, guys. Okay, can you see that?
Okay, absolutely. I got it. We'll do it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's simply a matter. And a lot of times in a project, you're going to have a property manager, which is your first line. They're not the landlord. They don't own the property. They're just the property manager. But I think it's a question of calling them, explaining to them that your business is shut down. Obviously, you hope to be open as soon as possible, but and just say, look, we've been shut down for a while. We have no patients. We have no revenue. And I would tell them, say, look, I'm not in a position to pay the rent, and I want to be as helpful as possible and accommodating as possible, but I'm not in a position to do it. They're trying to figure out, and I've had a couple landlords, they're getting requests from businesses in their mind don't really need the relief. They're just trying to take advantage. So they're always trying to figure out if you're trying to take advantage of them. So, but for a dental office that's been mandated to shut down, then need to convey that to them, and that you're not in a position to pay it. You want to be as accommodating as possible, etc. So we need to work something out. So it's really a phone call. Email is not really effective in this situation. You've got to personalize it as much as possible. Reach out to them. Be very nice. Everybody understands the situation. So, but be as personal as possible. Explain your situation. You want to work with them. We want to make them, we want to pay the rent back, but just give us some times, etc. So, so as far as how do we negotiate the terms, I think it's going to be, every situation's different. Every landlord's different. To me, it's like saying, look, I can, if you're in a position to pay the triple nets, which is the operating expenses, if you can pay that now for each month, I think that would be looked upon favorably by the landlord. I think it shows that you're making an effort and you're trying to do something. I think the key is if you can defer the rent for certainly maybe through obviously May, but maybe through June, and again, try to give yourself as long a time as possible to pay that back. Again, they're going to be probably pushing for you to pay that back in 2020 by the end of the year. I would really hope and try to get 12 months. So let's say starting in July, get 12 months to pay that back. I just don't want to have to get in another cash crunch by trying to pay all that rent back. So that to me is a good result. So if you can get deferral, maybe pay some triple nets during this deferral period, get 12 months to pay it back, that's a successful result. So that's, to me, is kind of the goal. Obviously, with the renewals, we talked about abatement. That's a kind of a different situation. That's in context of a renewal negotiation. So, but if you've got several years left, and this is more about the deferral now, that's a good result.
Okay.
Landlord locking anyone out. I have not heard of that. I think that would be a very, I think that would be very unlikely that would happen. I'm not going to say it won't. You never know. But I think in this situation, we talked about just a minute ago about what tenants are going to be, there are a number of tenants that are going to be left on the other side of this. I think they definitely want to retain you as a tenant. Locking you out would be a very distasteful action at this point. I think I think as long as you're communicating with them, I think that would be very, very unlikely. I've not heard of that at all. I think it's about communication and about trying to make an effort, showing them that there's an effort, and I think that will help you quite a bit. We have a property manager managed our facility. The case there suggests, I think you've got to work through the property, unless you've got a direct communication with the landlord or have their contact information. We contact the landlord directly. In a lot of cases, you're going to have to go through the property manager. And I think it's still the same message to them. They're not the landlord. And, some of these landlords have, some have 5 tenants, some have 5,000 tenants. So, you're going to get a lot of form letters and a lot of that stuff. And you're going to see landlords ask you for a lot of financial, some will ask you for a lot of financial information. Your P&L for, the year to date, tax returns from previous, all that stuff. They're trying to figure out. And also, are they going to say, well, they've got all these government programs in place, so you can get these loans and pay the rent that way. We know that there's been a lot of issues with that, and so that's not very realistic. So, I think the emphasis is that look, I'm going to pay the rent. I'm going to get, make you whole on the rent. I can't do that right now. And so, and a lot of times you're going to have to convey this message, and maybe your primary contact throughout this is going to be the property manager. That would not be unusual at all. So it's the same message to them. You need to convey your situation, communicate, show a willingness to work with them, and do that on a regular basis.
And then
what's the best way to get a hold of me? I'm going to give you my email address. It's Reynolds, EREYNOLDS, and it's 3 words, dentalspaceadvisors.com.
And we'll put that
that's a great way. My cell phone is 214-718-6777. So you can call or text, and I will, if you get my voicemail, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Email is probably the best way to reach out to me initially. Certainly, if you have any questions, I can answer that probably more quickly. But like I said, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact me anytime.
So, Evan?
As far as last pieces of advice, to me at this point, cash conservation is king, okay? Cash flow management. You want to take care of your people, but you've got to work with your suppliers, work with your landlord to conserve cash now. Everybody's in the same position. Everybody understands the situation. So it's about cash conservation, not putting yourself in a very difficult situation where it's going to generate a lot of anxiety. Life's too short to be sleepless and those things. So give yourself as much latitude as possible as far as your cash flow management.
All right. Well, I'll say this. Thank you so much, Evan, for
Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate it, even though I can't hear you.
You had a technical difficulty.
I don't know what happened. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Glenn, so much.
Thank you, Evan.
And
we'll see everyone later. Bye.